During dinner, my daughter-in-law shouted, "Pretend you like the SHREW, the inheritance is coming." I simply adjusted my dress and smiled. On Monday, I announced, "I donated all 9 million. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I've always believed that family gatherings should feel like warm embraces, not cold, calculated performances. But that Sunday dinner changed everything I thought I knew about my family, about the people I had loved unconditionally for decades. The evening had started pleasantly enough. My son Michael had suggested we all gather at his home for a special dinner. "Just because," he'd said over the phone, his voice carrying that rehearsed cheerfulness I'd grown accustomed to but chose to ignore. At 55, I'd learned to cherish these invitations, however infrequent they had become. I'd spent the afternoon preparing my famous apple pie, Michael's favorite since childhood. As I pulled into their driveway, I noticed Kiara's luxury SUV parked prominently in front, while my modest sedan would be relegated to the street. A small detail, perhaps, but one that seemed to perfectly symbolize my place in their lives. "Mom, you're here." Michael greeted me with a quick peck on the cheek, taking the pie from my hands before I'd barely crossed the threshold. "Kiara's just finishing up in the kitchen." Their home always felt like a showroom to me, immaculate, expensive, and somehow devoid of warmth despite all the designer furnishings. Photos of Kiara and Michael dominated the walls, with only a single small frame holding a picture of me with my grandchildren, tucked away on a side table where guests were unlikely to notice. Grandma. My grandchildren, Emma and Liam, came running, their genuine excitement a balm to my soul. I knelt down, my knees protesting, and embraced them tightly. "I've missed you two so much," I whispered, breathing in their scent, memorizing the feeling of their small arms around my neck. It had been nearly a month since I'd been allowed to see them, despite living just 20 minutes away. "Kids, don't wrinkle Grandma's dress." Kiara's voice cut through our moment as she emerged from the kitchen, wearing an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She didn't hug me or even smile, just nodded in my direction. "Dinner's almost ready." The evening progressed with the usual tension disguised as polite conversation. Kiara dominated the discussion, talking about their recent vacation to the Maldives, the private school they were considering for Emma, and the country club membership they'd finally secured. Michael occasionally glanced at me with what I interpreted as apologetic eyes, but he never steered the conversation toward anything that might include me. I was just finishing my meal when I excused myself to use the restroom. The downstairs bathroom was being renovated, another of Kiara's projects, so I headed upstairs. As I approached the landing, I heard their voices drifting from the kitchen. "I don't see why we have to do this every month," Kiara was saying, her voice sharp with irritation. "She barely notices the effort anyway." "She's my mother, Kiara," Michael replied, though his defense sounded weak, practiced. "Fingekwe gosta." "Da Megara," Kiara hissed. "A herança vem aí." She didn't realize I understood Portuguese, a language I'd learned years ago for a job I once loved. "Just pretend you like the old SHREW. The inheritance is coming soon enough." My hand flew to my chest as if to physically hold my heart together. I stood frozen, my breath caught painfully in my throat. "Keep your voice down," Michael whispered urgently. But he didn't contradict her. He didn't defend me. His silence was a confirmation that cut deeper than Kiara's words ever could. Somehow, I managed to compose myself before returning downstairs. I smoothed my dress, a simple blue one I'd worn specifically because Kiara had once complimented it, and fixed a smile on my face that felt like it might crack my skin. "That was a lovely meal," I said as I rejoined them, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "But I should probably head home. I'm feeling a bit tired." "Already?" Michael asked, though I could see the relief in his eyes. We Haven't even had your pie yet. You can enjoy it tomorrow, I said, gathering my purse. I've been fighting a headache all day. Kiara barely looked up from her phone. Feel better, Agatha. The drive home was a blur. Tears threatened, but I held them back with the determination of a woman who had weathered far worse storms. By the time I pulled into my driveway, a strange calm had settled over me. Inside my modest but comfortable home, a home I'd paid for with decades of hard work, I sat in my favorite chair and finally allowed reality to wash over me. My son and his wife were waiting for me to die so they could inherit my money. The monthly dinners, the occasional phone calls, the measured politeness, it was all a performance with a price tag attached. $9 million. That's what my financial advisor had recently confirmed my estate was worth, thanks to some smart investments and the sale of my late husband's business. $9 million that apparently meant more to my son than the woman who had given him life, who had held him through fevers and heartbreaks, who had worked 60-hour weeks to put him through college. As the first tear finally fell, I reached for my phone and pulled up my calendar. My appointment with my attorney was already scheduled for Monday morning, a routine check-in I'd planned weeks ago. A coincidence that now felt like destiny. I went to bed that night with my mind racing but my heart strangely steady. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. They wanted my money? Well, they were about to learn a valuable lesson about making assumptions. Monday couldn't come soon enough. Sleep eluded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Kiara's voice. Just pretend you like the old SHREW. And worse. My son's telling silence. As I lay awake, memories flooded back, washing over me like waves. Some gentle with nostalgia, others sharp with newly recognized pain. I remembered the day Robert died, 27 years ago, but the memory remained razor sharp. Michael was just 8 years old, clutching my hand at the funeral, his small fingers ice cold despite the summer heat. It's just us now, buddy, I'd whispered, trying to sound stronger than I felt. But we're going to be okay. Robert had left us with little more than a modest life insurance policy and a fledgling construction supply business drowning in debt. Friends and family had suggested I sell whatever assets remained and find a husband to help raise Michael. It was 1996, but their advice felt straight out of 1956. Instead, I dove headfirst into saving the business. I knew nothing about construction supplies, but I learned. Nights spent at the kitchen table after Michael was asleep, poring over contracts and inventory lists, teaching myself QuickBooks and negotiation tactics. I remembered the missed school plays and parent-teacher conferences when suppliers needed meetings or clients required attention. How many times had I arrived breathless and apologetic, slipping into the back of the auditorium just as Michael's part finished? How many nights had I tucked him in with promises to make it up to him, only to miss breakfast the next morning for an early delivery? It's for us, Michael, I'd explain. I'm building something for our future. He would nod, those solemn eyes, so like his father's, but I always saw the disappointment there. The business grew, despite the odds. I expanded from construction supplies to real estate development, developing a knack for identifying promising properties. One successful project led to another, and by the time Michael left for college, Westfield Developments was worth 7 figures. I made sure Michael wanted for nothing: the best schools, summer camps, extracurricular activities, a car at 16, a fully funded college education at his university of choice. No loans, no debt, no financial worries. The things I'd never had growing up. You're spoiling him, my sister Jean warned me once. Kids need to learn the value of hard work. He sees me working hard enough for both of us, I'd replied, dismissing her concern. I want him to have opportunities I never had. Now, staring at my bedroom ceiling, I wondered if Jean had been right all along. I remembered the day Michael brought Kiara home. She was beautiful, charming, and clearly from a wealthy background. Designer clothes, private school education, European vacations. She treated me with polite deference, always complimenting my home or my cooking, but there was something calculated in her attention that set off warning bells I chose to ignore. "Isn't she amazing, Mom?" Michael had asked, his eyes shining with the kind of adoration I'd once seen in Robert's. Who was I to question his happiness? The wedding was extravagant. Kiara's parents contributed, but I insisted on covering most expenses. "You've worked hard enough," I told Michael, when he half-heartedly offered to help with costs. "This is my gift to you both." Kiara had hugged me at the reception, whispered, "You're the mother I never had." And I'd believed her, wanted to believe her, despite the champagne on her breath and the way she'd immediately turned to charm a wealthy guest. After the wedding, the visits became less frequent. Phone calls shortened. Invitations arrived only for holidays and special occasions. When I dropped by unannounced once with homemade soup when Michael had the flu, Kiara answered the door with barely concealed annoyance. "We've got it under control, Agatha," she'd said, not inviting me in. "Michael's resting. I'll tell him you stopped by. When my grandchildren were born, I thought things might change. I offered to babysit, to help around the house, to give the new parents some time alone. Kiara always had an excuse. They had a nanny. Her mother was visiting. The children were on a strict schedule that couldn't be disrupted." I remembered sitting alone on Christmas Eve 4 years ago, staring at my phone, waiting for Michael's call. He and Kiara had taken the children to Aspen for the holidays. "It's just easier this way, Mom," he'd explained when canceling our traditional Christmas dinner. "We'll FaceTime you, I promise." The call never came. Just a text the next day. "Sorry, got caught up in festivities. Merry Christmas." Attached was a photo of my grandchildren opening presents in front of a professionally decorated tree in what looked like a luxury chalet. And yet, I kept giving. A generous check for their 10th anniversary. Down payment assistance when they wanted to upgrade to a larger home. Private school tuition for Emma, presented as a grandmother's gift, though I suspected Kiara simply didn't want to spend their own money. I got out of bed and walked to my home office, turning on the small lamp that cast a warm glow over the mahogany desk Robert and I had purchased when we were first married, one of the few pieces of our life together I'd managed to keep. From the bottom drawer, I retrieved a leather portfolio containing financial documents. $9 million. That's what my life's work amounted to, according to the latest valuation. The business I'd sold 5 years ago, the real estate investments, the stock portfolio I'd carefully curated, all of it now reduced to a number that my son and his wife were waiting to inherit. Had that been my value all along? Not the bedtime stories or Band-Aids on scraped knees, not the encouraging notes in lunchboxes or the proud tears at graduation. Just a dollar figure they were waiting to claim. Dawn was breaking by the time I closed the portfolio. A new day. And with it, a new resolve. I showered and dressed with particular care, choosing a tailored charcoal suit I usually reserved for business meetings. My attorney's office opened at 9. I intended to be his first appointment. As I backed out of my driveway, my phone chimed with a text from Michael. "Mom, you left so early last night. Everything okay?" Kiara was wondering if you could watch the kids this Saturday. Her cousin's getting married and children aren't allowed at the reception. I set the phone down without replying. For the first time in decades, Michael could wait for an answer. I had more important matters to attend to. Walter Hayes had been my attorney for 20 years. He looked surprised, but pleased when his receptionist announced my arrival. "Agatha, good to see you," he said, rising from behind his desk to greet me. "Our appointment wasn't until Friday, was it?" "Something's come up, Walter," I replied, settling into the chair across from him. "I need to make some changes to my will, significant ones, today." His eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded, reaching for a legal pad. I'm listening. I took a deep breath and began to outline my plan. A plan that would teach my family the most important lesson about wealth they'd ever receive. Are you absolutely certain about this? Walter asked when I finished. I thought of Kiara's dismissive words, of Michael's complicit silence, of all the years I'd tried to buy love that should have been freely given. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied. Walter's office felt different as I left that morning, lighter. Somehow, as if the weight I'd carried for years had been transferred to the papers now tucked safely in his filing cabinet. The revised will was done, but my investigation was just beginning. Take some time to reflect on this decision, Walter had advised, concern evident in his eyes. Major changes made in the heat of emotion. This isn't emotion, Walter. I'd interrupted. This is clarity. For the first time in years, I'm seeing my situation exactly as it is. The truth was, I needed proof. Not for legal reasons, but for my own peace of mind. I needed to confirm whether my entire family viewed me as nothing more than a walking inheritance, or if Kiara was the puppet master pulling everyone's strings. Over the next week, I became a detective in my own life. I started with phone calls to relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. My niece Jessica sounded genuinely pleased to hear from me, chatting about her nursing program until I casually mentioned I was considering making some changes to my financial arrangements. Her tone shifted immediately. Oh? What kind of changes, Aunt Agatha? Just some restructuring. Nothing dramatic, I replied vaguely. How's your mother doing? By the end of our call, Jessica had promised to visit soon, something she hadn't done in over a year, and had mentioned my situation 3 times without specifics. Within 2 hours, my sister Jean called. Agatha, is everything all right? Jessica mentioned you might be having financial concerns. The speed at which this information traveled was telling. Everything's fine, Jean, I assured her. Just doing some estate planning. Well, you know we're always here for you, she said, her voice overly warm. We should get together soon. It's been too long. I agreed, knowing full well it had been Jean who'd canceled our last 3 lunch dates. As I hung up, I made a note in the small leather journal I'd started keeping. The evidence was mounting. Next, I examined my bank statements from the past 5 years. The pattern was undeniable. Substantial withdrawals coinciding with Michael and Kiara's major life events. $20,000 for their anniversary trip to Italy. $35,000 toward their home renovation. $15,000 for Emma's private school deposit. I'd always viewed these as gifts freely given. Now I wondered, had they been expected? Demanded even in subtle ways I'd been too blind to recognize? More troubling were the small regular transfers to Michael's account, $500 every month for the past 3 years. I'd started them when he mentioned some temporary financial strain, intended as a short-term help. Yet they'd continued, unacknowledged, unmentioned, simply accepted as if they were his due. I called my financial advisor next. Richard, has Michael ever contacted you directly? I asked after exchanging pleasantries. A pause. He has, actually. About 6 months ago. He was inquiring about your portfolio value and retirement projections. Another hesitation. I assumed you'd authorize the conversation. I hadn't. What information did you share? Nothing specific, Agatha. I told him he'd need your written permission for details. But I did mention your assets were substantial. Was that inappropriate? No, Richard. You did the right thing. I'm just trying to get my affairs in order. My journal entries grew longer each day. Small incidents I'd previously dismissed now appeared in a sinister light. The time Kiara had borrowed my credit card for emergency diapers and returned it with $800 in unexplained charges. The family heirloom jewelry that had unfortunately been damaged during a house cleaning. Pieces that had mysteriously disappeared. Michael's increasing reluctance to discuss their finances despite their lavish lifestyle. The most revealing test came when I canceled Saturday's babysitting without explanation. Michael called immediately. "Mom, we really need you tomorrow. Kiara's already bought her dress for this wedding." "I'm sorry, Michael. Something important came up." "More important than helping your family?" His voice had an edge I rarely heard. Frustration bordering on anger. "Yes," I said simply. "More important." The silence that followed spoke volumes. No concern for what my important matter might be. No offer to help me instead. Just disappointment that I wouldn't be providing the free childcare they'd counted on. "Fine," he finally said. "We'll figure something out." 3 hours later, Kiara called with a voice dripping honey. "Agatha, darling, I hope everything's okay. Michael mentioned you had something come up Saturday." "Just some personal business. Kiara, anything we can help with?" She paused. "You know, if it's about the house or any paperwork, Michael would be happy to come over." "Paperwork?" "You know, important documents. Wills, trusts, that sort of thing. It's so complicated these days, isn't it? Michael worries you might be overwhelmed managing it all alone." There it was. The confirmation I'd been seeking but dreading to find. My son's wife was not only counting on my money, she was actively strategizing how to ensure they'd get it. All. "That's thoughtful, Kiara, but my affairs are in excellent order. I just saw my attorney this week, in fact." Another telling silence. "Oh. Was there a particular reason?" "Nothing for you to worry about," I assured her, a new steel in my voice that I could tell caught her off guard. After we hung up, I sat in my garden, watching the sun set over the roses Robert and I had planted decades ago. The evidence was irrefutable. My family, or at least the part of it I'd prioritized for years, saw me as nothing more than a future inheritance. The realization should have crushed me. Instead, it crystallized my resolve. The plan I'd set in motion with Walter wasn't just right, it was necessary. That evening, I called Jean's daughter Jessica back. "About that visit you mentioned," I said. "Are you free for lunch tomorrow? There's something important I'd like to discuss with you." Jessica sounded surprised, but agreed readily. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year, but I remembered she had always been direct and honest. Sometimes painfully so. Tomorrow would determine if there was anyone in my family worth keeping close. As I prepared for bed that night, my phone chimed with a text from Michael. "Found a sitter for tomorrow. Hope everything's okay with you. Should we be worried?" For the first time in my adult life, I left my son's message unanswered. The time for pretense was over. In 1 week, I would gather them all together and reveal my decision, a decision that would change our family dynamics forever. I slept soundly that night, more at peace than I had been in years. The truth, however painful, was infinitely preferable to the beautiful lies I'd been telling myself for so long. Lunch with Jessica proved surprisingly emotional. We met at a small cafe near her nursing school, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was performing some prescribed role of generous aunt. She arrived breathless, her scrubs barely concealed under a light jacket, apologizing for not having time to change after her clinical rotation. "You look perfect," I assured her, meaning it. There was something refreshing about her disheveled authenticity. Our conversation started with casual catch-up, but when the food arrived, I steered us toward more substantial matters. "Jessica, why did you really call me back so quickly after our last conversation?" She paused, fork midway to her mouth, then set it down with a sigh. "Honestly, Mom made it sound like you might be having money problems. She said we should strengthen family connections in case you needed support." Her eyes met mine directly. "But that's not it at all, is it?" "No," I confirmed. "Quite the opposite, actually." I didn't share the details of what I'd overheard or my revised will, but I did ask about family perceptions. Jessica didn't hold back. "Everyone knows you've done well, Aunt Agatha. And I'm sorry to say it, but some people talk as if your money is already spent. She twisted her napkin uncomfortably. Michael and Kiara especially. They mention your estate at family gatherings you're not invited to. The confirmation stung, but I appreciated her honesty. And you? What do you hope to get from me, Jessica? Her eyes widened, then narrowed with hurt. Nothing. I have student loans and a tiny apartment, but they're mine. I don't want handouts. Not even from family. She hesitated. Is that why we haven't seen much of each other? Did you think I was after your money too? The question hit harder than I expected. Had I been so focused on Michael and his family that I'd unfairly pushed others away, assuming similar motives? I think I've been blind in many ways, I admitted. But I'm seeing clearly now. By the end of lunch, I'd invited Jessica to the family gathering I was planning for the following weekend. Just be prepared, I warned her. It might get uncomfortable. Family gatherings usually are, she replied with a wry smile. But I'll be there. The next phase of my plan required more courage. I called Michael that evening and invited myself to dinner at their house, a reversal of our usual arrangement that clearly caught him off guard. Tomorrow? Let me check with Kiara. I'm not asking Michael, I said firmly. I'm telling you I'm coming for dinner at 6:30. I've been cooking for you for decades. I think you can manage one meal. His stammered acceptance told me everything. I needed to know about the shifting power dynamics between us. When I arrived the next evening, the house was in obvious disarray. Kiara greeted me with a fixed smile, her hair perfectly styled but strain evident around her eyes. Agatha, what a surprise to have you join us. Is it? I asked, removing my coat and handing her the bottle of wine I'd brought. I thought family dinners were meant to be a regular occurrence. The children's genuine delight at seeing me twice in 1 week was the only bright spot in an otherwise tense evening. Kiara had ordered takeout, not even attempting to cook, while Michael seemed perpetually on edge, watching my every reaction as if I might explode at any moment. Halfway through dinner, I placed my fork down deliberately. I've made a significant decision that affects the family, I announced. I'd like everyone to come to my house this Saturday at noon. There's something important I need to share. Kiara's smile froze. What kind of decision? One that's been a long time coming, I replied calmly. I expect everyone to be there. You, Michael, the children, Jean and her family. I've already spoken with Jessica. Mom, if this is about your will or anything like that, Michael began, confirming every suspicion I'd had. This is about family, I interrupted, and what that word truly means. The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable conversation, punctuated by long silences. As I prepared to leave, Kiara pulled me aside with forced intimacy. Agatha, you know we love having you here, but these surprises are a bit disruptive. Is everything okay with you? Mentally, I mean. Women your age sometimes struggle with emotional stability. The condescension was breathtaking. I've never been more stable, Kiara, I replied. But thank you for your concern. The days leading up to Saturday's gathering were surprisingly peaceful. I spent them putting my affairs in order. Not in the euphemistic sense, but literally organizing my life and home. I cleaned closets, sorted photographs, and prepared the formal dining room I rarely used. Walter called mid-week to confirm the paperwork was finalized. The documents will be delivered Friday, he assured me. Are you still certain about this, Agatha? Absolutely, I told him, more certain with each passing day. By Saturday morning, everything was ready. I'd prepared a simple lunch, nothing elaborate, just sandwiches and salad. This wasn't a celebration, after all, but a reckoning. Jean's family arrived first, her husband Tom, Jessica, and her son Brian with his wife. They seemed nervous but genuinely pleased to be invited. Michael, Kiara, and the children arrived precisely. At noon, Kiara wearing what I recognized as her important meetings outfit, complete with the pearl necklace I'd given her for her 30th birthday. Once everyone was seated in the living room, I remained standing, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I've recently had cause to reflect on what family truly means and what my legacy should be." The room grew silent. I could practically hear the calculations running through Kiara's mind. For years, I've worked to build financial security. First, for Michael after his father died, then for myself in retirement. I've been fortunate. My investments have done well. I paused, looking directly at Kiara. "Very well, in fact." Michael shifted uncomfortably. Kiara's smile grew more predatory. "I've realized, however, that money without values isn't a gift. It's a burden, perhaps even a curse." I opened the folder Walter had delivered and removed the documents inside. "I've made a decision about my estate, which is currently valued at approximately $9 million. A collective intake of breath filled the room. Even Jean, who I knew had suspected my success, seemed shocked by the figure. As of Monday, $6 million of that amount has been donated to a trust dedicated to supporting small business owners who are single parents. The remaining $3 million will be distributed as follows." Kiara's face drained of color. Michael's mouth opened, then closed without sound. "Michael and Kiara, you will receive $250,000, enough to pay off your mortgage, but not enough to maintain your current lifestyle without working." "Mom, you can't be serious," Michael began, but I held up my hand. "Emma and Liam will each receive $1 million in education trusts, accessible only for tuition and related expenses, with any remainder released when they turn 30. Kiara stood up abruptly. "This is outrageous. You can't just—" "I can, and I have," I said calmly. "The remaining funds will be distributed among other family members who have demonstrated that they value relationships over resources." I looked at Jessica, whose eyes were wide with shock, then back to my son and his wife. "You've made it clear what matters most to you," I continued. "And it isn't me." Michael's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "Is this because Kiara called you a name? She was just joking." The room fell silent again as everyone processed this revelation. "This isn't about a name, Michael. This is about the silence that followed it. Your silence." I set the papers down on the coffee table. "The donations have already been processed. The decision is final." Kiara grabbed her purse, her movements jerky, with rage. "Come on, Michael, we're leaving." But Michael didn't move. For the first time in years, he was looking at me, really looking at me, with something beyond expectation or obligation in his eyes. "What have we done?" he whispered. The silence that followed Michael's question hung heavy in the room. Kiara stood by the doorway, her face contorted with fury, while the rest of the family remained frozen in their seats, witnesses to the implosion of carefully constructed facades. "What have we done?" Michael repeated, his voice stronger this time. "Mom, you can't be serious about this." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside me. Kiara marched back across the room, her designer heels clicking aggressively against my hardwood floors. "This is elder abuse," she declared, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You're clearly not in your right mind. We'll contest this." Jessica stood up then, surprising everyone. "Aunt Agatha seems perfectly lucid to me," she said quietly. "Maybe, instead of threatening her, you should consider why she felt the need to do this." Kiara rounded on her. "Stay out of this. You're just happy because you're getting a piece of what should have been ours." "I didn't even know there was money involved. Until 5 minutes ago," Jessica shot back. "Some of us actually care about Aunt Agatha as a person." Jean cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should all calm down and—" "No," I interrupted. No more calming down. No more pretending. This family has swept too much under the rug for too long. I turned to Michael, who looked as though he'd aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. I heard what Kiara said about me at dinner last week. I heard her call me a Megara and talk about waiting for my inheritance. And I heard your silence, Michael. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Emma, who at 9 was old enough to understand the tension, if not its cause, pressed herself against the sofa cushions as if trying to disappear. It wasn't like that, Michael stammered. Kiara was just frustrated. We didn't mean... Don't lie to me, I said sharply. Not anymore. I've spent the past week looking back at our relationship over the years. The monthly checks you never acknowledged, the gifts that became expectations. The way I was gradually excluded from your lives except when you needed something. That's not fair, Kiara interjected. We include you in everything important. When was the last time you invited me over without asking for money or childcare? I challenged. Her mouth opened, then closed without an answer. The truth is, I continued, looking around the room at all of them. I enabled this. I thought I could buy my way into your lives. I thought if I just gave enough, money, time, support, I'd be valued. But that's not how family is supposed to work. Michael's eyes filled with tears. Whether from genuine remorse or the loss of his expected windfall, I couldn't tell. Mom, please, he said, stepping toward me. We can fix this. We love you. Do you? I asked simply. Or do you love what I can provide? Of course we love you, he insisted, glancing back at Kiara, who remained stonily silent. This is just a misunderstanding. Then explain it to me, I challenged. Explain why you checked on my estate value with my financial advisor without my knowledge. Explain why every time I've set a boundary this past week, declining to babysit, insisting on dinner at your house, you've reacted with anger rather than concern. He had no answer. Jean stood up, her expression troubled. Agatha, while I don't condone Kiara's behavior or Michael's complicity, don't you think this is an extreme reaction? They're still your family. Yes, they are, I agreed. Which is why I didn't leave them nothing. The children's education is secured. Their home can be too if they choose to use the money wisely. But I won't fund a lifestyle built on waiting for me to die. You self-righteous old... Kiara began. But Michael cut her off with a sharp gesture. Enough, Kiara. You're making it worse. He turned back to me, his expression shifting to something that might have been genuine remorse. Mom, I don't know what to say. I never meant for you to feel used. Intentions matter less than actions, Michael. For years, your actions have shown me exactly where I stand in your priorities. So that's it? Kiara demanded. You've made your decision, ruined our lives, and now we're just supposed to accept it? Your lives aren't ruined, I responded calmly. You're both healthy, educated adults with every advantage. If losing an inheritance you never earned ruins you, then I've failed as a mother in more ways than I realized. The room fell silent again. Tom, Jean's husband, who had remained quiet throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. Perhaps we should give Agatha and Michael some privacy to discuss this. I shook my head. No, this needs to be said in front of everyone. No more secrets, no more pretending. I walked over to where Emma and Liam sat, their small faces pinched with confusion and distress. Kneeling down to their level, I took their hands in mine. I want you both to know that none of this is your fault. I love you very much. And I always will. That's why I've made sure you'll have money for college and whatever comes after. Because grandmothers are supposed to look out for their grandchildren's futures. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Are you mad at Daddy and Mommy? I'm disappointed, I told her honestly. But that has nothing to do with how I feel about you. I stood up again, facing the room. I've made my decision and it's final. What happens next is up to each of you. Kiara grabbed her purse again. Children, we're leaving. Now. Michael hesitated, looking torn between his wife and his mother. Michael, Kiara snapped. Now. With a last, conflicted glance at me, he followed his wife, ushering the children toward the door. The sound of it, slamming behind them, echoed through the suddenly quiet house. Jean approached me cautiously. Agatha, are you okay? I nodded, surprised to find it was true. I am. For the first time in years, I think I really am. After the others had left, with promises to call and check on me, Jessica stayed behind to help clean up the barely touched lunch. I'm proud of you, Aunt Agatha, she said as we washed dishes side by side. That took incredible courage. Not courage, I corrected her. Self-respect. Something I should have found years ago. What do you think will happen now? She asked. With Michael and Kiara, I mean. I considered the question as I dried a plate. I don't know. That's up to them. But I do know that whatever relationship we have going forward will be built on something real, not financial dependence. Jessica nodded thoughtfully. For what it's worth, I think Michael does love you. He's just lost his way. Perhaps, I acknowledged. Time will tell. After Jessica left, I sat alone in my garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The confrontation had been painful, yes, but also strangely freeing. The weight I'd carried for so long, the desperate need to be valued, by people who saw me as a means to an end, had finally been set down. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. We need to talk. Just you and me. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a simple reply. When you're ready to be honest, I'll be here. The future was uncertain, but for once, that didn't frighten me. I had spoken my truth. I had stood my ground. Whatever came next, I would face it with the dignity I had finally reclaimed for myself. 3 weeks passed before I heard from Michael again. 3 weeks of surprising peace, interrupted occasionally by worried calls from Jean or thoughtful texts from Jessica. 3 weeks of rediscovering who I was beyond the role of the bank of mom. I planted a new rose garden, joined a book club at the local library, and even accepted a dinner invitation from Walter and his wife, my first purely social engagement in longer than I could remember. Life continued, simpler but somehow richer than before. When Michael finally called, his voice sounded different. Humbled, perhaps even genuinely contrite. Can we meet somewhere? He asked. Just us. No Kiara. We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory for what promised to be a difficult conversation. I arrived early, claiming a quiet corner table and ordering a cup of tea to steady my nerves. When Michael walked in, I barely recognized him. Gone was the polished, confident man who'd sat in my living room 3 weeks ago. This Michael looked tired, his clothes slightly rumpled, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. Mom, he said simply, sliding into the chair across from me. Michael. I kept my voice neutral, waiting. He stared down at the table for a long moment, before meeting my eyes. Kiara's left, he said finally. She's filed for divorce. Whatever I'd been expecting, it wasn't this. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I had never wished for my son's marriage to end. Don't be, he replied with a bitter laugh. It turns out when the money disappeared, so did her interest in being my wife. He ran a hand through his hair. She wanted me to contest the will, hire lawyers, declare you incompetent, whatever it took to get the inheritance back. When I refused, she said I was choosing you over her and the children. And the children? I asked, my heart tightening. We're working out custody. His voice cracked slightly. She's angry, but she won't keep them from me, or you. In fact, she told them you weren't their grandmother anymore. and Emma got so upset that Kiara had to backtrack. I sipped my tea, processing this information. I never intended to cause this kind of upheaval in your life, Michael. Didn't you? He challenged, though without real heat. You knew exactly what you were doing when you changed your will. I knew I was establishing boundaries, I corrected. I knew I was refusing to be used anymore. The consequences of that were up to each of you. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. He hesitated, then added, I've been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks about the kind of son I've been, the kind of man I've become. And? I prompted when he fell silent. And I don't like what I see, he admitted. Somewhere along the way, I started measuring my worth by what I owned, what I could show off. I married a woman who reinforced that mindset, and I took you for granted. Yes, I agreed simply. You did. I remember how hard you worked after Dad died, he continued. The long hours, the stress. I was so proud of you then. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing your success as something you earned and started seeing it as something I deserved to benefit from. Why? I asked, the question that had haunted me for weeks finally finding voice. Was I too generous? Did I make it too easy? Michael considered this. Maybe partly, but that's not an excuse. I was an adult making choices. Bad ones. He met my eyes directly. I let Kiara's attitude toward you go unchallenged because it was easier than standing up to her. I accepted your financial help without gratitude because it was easier than living within my means. I allowed the distance between us to grow because addressing it would have meant confronting uncomfortable truths. His honesty was unexpected, and I had to admit, touching. I'm trying to do better now, he continued. I've moved into a smaller apartment. I'm looking at my spending, making changes. Emma asked why we couldn't live in our house anymore, and for the first time, I gave her an honest answer that we'd been living beyond our means, and it was time to be more responsible. How did she take it? A small smile touched his lips. Better than I expected. She asked if that meant we could get a dog now, since the old house had rules against pets. I found myself smiling too, recognizing the resilience of children. I don't expect forgiveness, Michael said after a moment, and I don't expect you to change your mind about the will. But I want you to know that I understand why you did what you did, and in a strange way, I'm grateful. Grateful? I echoed. Surprised? This wake-up call was long overdue. I hate that it took something so dramatic to make me see what I was becoming. But I'm glad it happened before it was too late to change. I studied my son's face, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but found none. This wasn't the polished performance I'd grown accustomed to. This was raw, painful honesty. I've missed you, I admitted finally. Not the you that showed up for monthly dinners with an agenda, but the real you. The son who used to call just to tell me about his day. I've missed that too, he said quietly. I've missed a lot of things. We talked for nearly 2 hours, laying bare years of misunderstandings and unspoken resentments. It wasn't easy, and at times it was painfully uncomfortable, but it felt necessary, like lancing a wound to allow it to heal properly. When we finally parted, Michael hugged me tightly. Can I bring the kids to see you this weekend? He asked. No agenda, no expectations, just family time. I'd like that, I told him, meaning it. The following Saturday, Michael arrived with Emma and Liam, both clutching homemade cards. We spent the day baking cookies and playing board games, and for the first time in years, I felt like a grandmother rather than an ATM. As weeks turned into months, our new relationship slowly took root. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks and difficult moments, times when old patterns threatened to resurface. But there was honesty now, and a mutual respect that had been missing before. Kiara remained distant, our only communication happening through Michael regarding the children. The divorce proceeded, and though I never asked for details, Jessica mentioned hearing that Kiara had started dating a wealthy real estate developer barely a month after the separation. 6 months after. What the family now referred to simply as the meeting, I invited everyone to my home for Thanksgiving. Jean and her family came, including Jessica, who proudly introduced her new boyfriend. Michael arrived with Emma and Liam, all three looking more relaxed and genuine than I'd seen them in years. As we gathered around the table, I looked at the faces of my family. Imperfect, complicated, but real. The relationships were no longer transactional but built on something more meaningful. "Before we eat," I said, raising my glass, "I'd like to propose a toast." Everyone fell silent, glasses raised expectantly. "To second chances," I said simply, "and to the courage to demand better, from others and from ourselves." "To second chances," they echoed. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Michael lingered behind to help with cleanup. "You know," he said as we worked side by side in the kitchen, "I think this might have been the best Thanksgiving we've ever had." "Because of the food?" I teased. "Because it was real," he replied seriously. "No pretending, no hidden agendas. Just family being family. Messy and honest." I smiled, realizing he was right. The inheritance that had once threatened to divide us had, ironically, cleared the way for something far more valuable: authenticity. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat in my garden wrapped in a warm blanket against the November chill. The stars shone overhead, and I found myself speaking aloud to Robert as I sometimes did when I was alone. "You'd be proud," I told him. "Not of the money or the business success, but of this. Finding the courage to demand dignity, to insist on being valued for who I am rather than what I have." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and I could almost imagine it was his response. Some inheritances, I realized, weren't measured in dollars, but in the strength to stand up for yourself, in the wisdom to know your own worth, and in the peace that comes from living with integrity. That was the true legacy I hoped to leave behind. Not millions in the bank, but the example of a woman who finally learned that respect cannot be bought, only earned, and that genuine love is never conditional. Had reclaimed my dignity, and in doing so, I had found something far more precious than any inheritance: myself. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.